Welcome to the Branford Camera Club monthly meeting. Tonight's meeting is by Mary Atwood, fine art photographer and author. And the subject tonight is Picture Change, touching the past, present, and future through photography. Mary is a longtime resident of the First Coast area whose deep appreciation of its natural beauty, rich history, and diverse culture is often reflected in her work. Mary's fine art photography is included in numerous public, private, and corporate collections in the United States and France. PNC Bank has acquired more than 20 of her images for their corporate collection. Mary's photographs have been exhibited in galleries, museums, and public art venues, with more than 25 solo expeditions. Mary was a recipient of a Prestige Art Venues grant in 2011 and has done commission work for the MOCA in Jacksonville, Florida. Her quest to capture the ultimate side of North Florida's history led to the publication of her book, Historic Homes of Florida, First Coast, by the History Press of Charleston, South Carolina. Historic Homes of Florida's First Coast was awarded first prize for adult nonfiction by the Florida State Chapter of the National League of American Pen Women. Now, here is Mary and her program.
Okay, before we get into anything, I just want to give you a little bit of background. My father was a military photographer in World War II. So I grew up with a camera in hand. And I was the kid on the school bus with Look magazine and Life magazine. Photos have always been a part of my life. And photography has always been a part of my life. I can remember using a Kodak Brownie when I was just big enough to hold one. And for my 10th birthday, he bought me a Polaroid Swinger. Who remembers that? So images and making images and creating images and communicating through images is something that is ingrained in me. And I think one of the things that's magical about photography, you know, everybody wishes for that time machine. And each of us have one. We capture that one moment that's going to be gone in a split second. And that's why I always like to start off talking a little bit about images and the power that they have. The images that I'm going to show you here, until we get to my images, are images that impacted me as I grew up. So some of them are older than I am. Obviously, I don't remember this one when it happened, but I can remember seeing this photograph, and it instantly took me to a moment that I never experienced. My parents experienced it. My grandparents experienced it, but I didn't. And just looking at that one image made me know and appreciate what they had been through. The next image I definitely remember, and someone here said they have this. You do. Great image from the end of the Vietnam War and people coming home, and it speaks to the relief and the joy and the reunion. It's just a wonderful image. This image was actually taken, I guess everybody here knows this story, or maybe not. This was taken by a Jacksonville Journal photographer back in the day when we not only had one newspaper, we had two. The Journal was the evening paper, and he was on his way to another assignment. It was a train workers' strike, and saw these people on the power lines, and he thought, yeah, I'll go back when I'm done with my other assignment and see what's going on. When he got back, this is what was going on. And so he photographed it and won a Pulitzer Prize for it. It was a great image.
That was a Journal.
It definitely brought about a change in the way that people helped others. You know, it became common for people to know about mouth-to-mouth resuscitation before CPR. So it really impacted tons of people. This image I remember in particular from the Vietnam War. I was still very young, but old enough to be aware. I remember seeing this in the magazine and stopping and going, wow, you know, who has that kind of courage to stand in front of a gun and place flowers in it? And so, yeah, that one I remember distinctly.
Was that Kent State?
No.
No, okay.
No,
They did the same thing with the flowers,
Yeah.
I think.
And this, of course, is an image I saw on television.
Yeah.
I think all of us saw this on television. And the amount of courage that it took for that guy to stand there and for that photographer to be there at that time and get that shot, I'm incredibly jealous. It's a wonderful, speaks volumes. This I remember seeing on television also. It was Christmas time when they first circled the moon, and I think what really changed after these images came out was the way that we saw the world. We began to see the world differently. We began to see it as small and fragile, which it is. I mean, it seems big when you look outside, but from this perspective, and I really think that Earth Day became much more of a big thing after these images were published. And I thought it was important to show this image in particular, considering what's going on in the Middle East. This is not current, of course, this is from Syria in 2013. But when I first saw it, I thought, that is not what you think of when you think of an Arab gunman. You don't stop and consider the humanity. You only hear what you see on the news, and you know, that's the back and forth and the shooting and the bombs and da-da-da. You don't stop and think about the simplicity of just the fact that this person had enough in him to stop and pet this poor cat. I think it changes your perspective on what your preconceived notion is. And I think that's one of the best things about photography, is that it can make you stop and reconsider things. The next few images I'm going to show, and I'm going to only show you a few, is my work. And I worked with a group of students, a group of high school students, one summer. It was a summer program, and they wanted to photograph love. And I said, well, let's just don't go out and find people kissing or people holding hands or people walking on the beach. Let's think deeper than that. So I shared with them a few images I have created on that subject. The first one is called The Careless Dancer. And The Careless Dancer, the concept behind it is that in every relationship, there can be moments when someone accidentally hurts the other person. They don't intend to, it's not something they've done on purpose. And this image is actually 3 different images in one. I photographed the ballerina at the Florida Ballet. She's actually somebody I knew, and her mother said, would you come and take photos? And I said, please, twist my arm. And then this image of the heart is actually taken from a piece of art glass that is owned by a family member. And then the background image is a wall at Epcot Center. I'm real infamous for stopping and taking pictures of walls, texture, things like that, because I have a library of those that I will come back and use when I need them for something like this. So that's that one. This is called Heartburn, and this is the only image where I've ever risked being arrested. The concept behind this one is, this is what happens when someone is gone, okay? Someone has gone for whatever reason, and you're left on your own, and you're to deal with that any way you can. So I got this chair, and I painted the red stripe because I wanted that balance of the red. And there's a place in Jacksonville, the Riverwalk, where you approach the Acosta Bridge, and there's a walkway that spirals down like this. And up underneath that is an area that is all rock and cement and everything, and it's like, this is the perfect spot. So I gathered my chair, and I made my heart. I took a heart-shaped balloon and the stuff that you create, a plaster wrap for a cast, and I made the heart. And then I gathered my accelerants. I used 3 different kinds. I used sterno, and I used denatured alcohol, and I used lighter fluid, because every one of those burns at a different temperature, so therefore you get a different color. and I got my jug of water. So we go to this one spot, I set my chair up, I set the heart up, and I use that tacky museum glue stuff to hold it in place. And then I start smelling all of the accelerants and pouring stuff. And then I look around and make sure nobody's there, and I set that baby on fire. And I stood there and photographed it for a good 3 minutes. It took that long for it to completely disintegrate the heart. And then I doused it with the water and gathered my stuff and scurried out of there as fast as I could. I really feel very fortunate that I did not get caught doing that. But this has been a prize winner for me. This one has done well, and it's actually the only piece of artwork that I've ever created that my son said, I want this. So I put it on a big canvas, and he's carried it with him everywhere he's moved. So. And then this one is about how in every relationship, you know, there are down times, there are up times, and you just keep going. You just keep working at it. You just keep getting up and making do and struggling through. This is also 3 different images. This was a dancer that I photographed also at the Florida Ballet, coincidentally, different time, but, and so it's 2 different images of her. And then the heart, the broken heart, is actually a geranium petal that I photographed on the streets of Paris. So that's that presentation. And if somebody can help me out, I'd like to get to the next one and go ahead and talk a little bit about the book. This is my book, which she's already shown you. Very proud of this. This was total accident. Historic Homes of Florida's First Coast. Total accident, from start to finish. Everything that happened here was completely unintended, and I'll tell you how it happened. I had a show that I was participating in Gainesville, and a friend of mine said, I don't like to really ride long distance, and that's a long distance for me, by myself. So I invited a friend, come go with me, ride with me down to Gainesville. And she said, well, while we're there, why don't we go to Dudley Farms? And I'm like, what is Dudley Farms? And she told me what it was, and I said, okay, great, I'll bring the camera, we'll go, you know, we'll spend the afternoon. So I go down there, and I start taking photos, and I'm not really thinking much about it until I get home. And I pull the photos up on the big screen. I'm sure this has happened to all of you. You're clicking through them, and you run across one, and you go, whoa, that's nice. Who did that? I did. And it's one image, and I'll show it to you in a few minutes. Spoke to me on a very deep level. It reminded me so much of my grandfather's farm. My father grew up in a log cabin on this farm. And so we used to go there when I was a kid, and it was like my favorite place because it was weird and different and spooky and smelled funny, and it was dark in certain rooms. There was only electricity in the kitchen. The rest of the house was, you know, it was dark. And it was big because I was this big. And so I started thinking, I need to follow this. This speaks to me on such a deep level, I really need to follow it. So that's what I did. I started going, I'm still working full time. So I started going on weekends, every chance I got, and I went to different historic sites. And I laid out some criteria. I wanted it to be at least 100 years old. I wanted it to be within a 150-mile radius of Jacksonville, because, you know, still working a full-time job. I wanted it to be historic in some sense. You know, it didn't have to be anybody famous. It just had to be historic in some sense. And I wanted it to be open to the public. I wanted it to be places I could have people go. So these are some of the houses that I photographed in Jacksonville. And Kingsley Plantation, fabulous place. I loved going there, but it was one of the places where I went, and this happened twice, and I'll tell you the other story in a minute, where I went and I photographed the downstairs. Now, everywhere you go when you're doing this kind of work, they send someone with you. They say it's a guide, but what it really is a minder to make sure you don't use your flash, you don't use a tripod. You don't move anything. You don't touch anything. So I photograph the downstairs, and I say, oh, I want to go upstairs. And they're like, no, you can't. It's not safe. The stairs are structurally unsound. And I'm like, please, please, I don't weigh that much. Please, I'm a skinny girl. And finally, I begged so much that they were like, we're not going to get rid of her until we tell her. So they said, stay to the side of the stairs, only go to the top, look around, and then come back down. So that's what I did. And then when I got back down, I looked back up and I saw that light at the top of the stairs. And it's like, that's my photo right there. Because it tells so much of the same story that mirrors what Anna Kingsley's life was like. If you know anything about her, you know that she was brought here as a slave, and she wound up being quite an impressive woman. Her story is astounding, and it is in the book, so I won't tell it to you. But it's a great, great place, and part of the reason I did this book is to get people to go there so that they can have more funding so that they can fix those stairs. This is the Major Webb House. It is in a park, the Walter Jones Park in Jacksonville in the Mandarin area. And interesting story about Major Webb. He actually came to the South during the Civil War and just loved it so much because it was warm. And so he came down after the war and bought this property and had sort of a small plantation going. And he was right on the river, and at that time, everything was transported by steamboat. So he built this long pier that went out into the river and had a railroad track on it. And he would have everybody load up all the vegetables and fruits and stuff into the one railroad car, and they would run it out to the end of the pier, and the steamboats would pick it up. How cool is that? It's a really nice place to go, and they're wonderful people. I love them. City of Jacksonville does an awesome job funding them. Delia's house, one of my very favorite stories. The Delia's house was lost for years and years and years. It was in the Piccolata area. Delia's was born into a family that was in the wool business, and he didn't want to be in the wool business. He wanted to be a musician. So his father sent him to Florida to run a plantation, an orange grove, to punish him. And he loved it here. And he spent all of his time not running his plantation, but going up to Jacksonville and hanging out with other musicians and doing what he wanted to do. But the house was lost forever, and this woman with the St. Augustine Historical Society, I believe it was, managed to find it. And so they took it apart and trucked it up to Jacksonville, and it now stands on the campus of Jacksonville University. So I called them, and I said, I want to go and photograph the Delia's house. And they said, sure, come on. And they put me in touch with a professor, and he said, I'll meet you at this time. And I said, great. So I get there, and they open the door, they unlock the building for me, and the only time this happened during this entire project, he looks at me and he says, I've got a meeting, I've got to go. You go ahead and just take your photos and just close the door behind you when you're done. It's like, okay. So I did, and I spent about 30 minutes in there, maybe 45, because it was summertime and it was hot, and I was like sweating. I get back out of my car and I do what we all do. I turn on my camera and I'm scrolling through the photos to make sure I've gotten what I need. And I have gotten what I need, and then I sit there and I think, wait a minute, you just spent 30, 45 minutes in Delia's house alone, just you. How cool is your life? And it was an amazing experience. The Merrill house, holy cow. Interesting house, interesting story. The Merrills ran the shipyards and are responsible for a lot of what happened in that time period in Jacksonville. It's one of the few houses to survive the Great Fire. I will tell you, they do keep all those shutters closed, and it is very hot in there. There is no air conditioning. That was probably the most uncomfortable experience I had during this project. The foreman's house at Jacksonville Beach. back when the railroad was the thing in Florida, they built these little houses like every 10 miles, and they were all exactly the same. They were all exactly the same floor plan, exactly the same color, and that's where the railroad foremen who were responsible for taking care of that 10 miles of the train track, that's where they lived. One of the things I like best about this is, who knows what that is?
What?
The rake. Does anybody know?
Is that a blueberry rake? I can't see it.
It's an oyster rake. I had no idea. I've been there like 20 minutes photographing, and I'm like, what kind of rake is that? And they're like, yeah, you're a townie. Beach people always know what that is. The Clark house. This is the other house where I begged and begged and begged to go upstairs. And this house just barely made it in. I photographed this house on the day that it turned 100 years old. Yeah, it's like, whew, okay. But it was the same experience. I went in and I photographed the downstairs. And I have to stop and tell you a little bit about Carrie Clark. Carrie Clark was one of the founding people of the Orange Park First Baptist Church. And she had a real heart for the children in her community. Before the church was built, she would go and gather them all up and bring them to her home and do Sunday school lessons on her front porch. She had a real heart for the young women in her community especially. If there was anyone who was going to get married who couldn't afford a reception, she would host the reception in her home. So Carrie Clark is really well remembered in Orange Park to this day. So I go and I photograph the downstairs, and I'm not getting what I'm looking for, and I know it. Sometimes you just know, I'm not getting something that really speaks to me here. So I beg them, let me go upstairs. No, 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 we haven't redone the upstairs. Please let me go upstairs. You never know what's going to be up there until you go. No, 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 please. Again, they figured they weren't going to get rid of me, let her go upstairs. I go upstairs, and at the very top of the stairs, very first room I look in, here's this wedding dress right by the window with the light spilling in on it, and I'm like, there you go. That's why I had to go upstairs. The regional houses that I did were really fun. As much as I don't like going alone, I do like to travel. I do like to get around outside of Jacksonville. And there's so much to be seen in the St. Augustine area specifically.
Is today voting?
No.
Oh, okay, I was curious.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not voted today.
So anyway, we'll start with the Father O'Reilly house.
I have no
I don't know if
idea.
any of you know the story of the Father O'Reilly house.
You too.
Father O'Reilly was an Irish priest who was in service to the Spanish crown, which explains why he was in St. Augustine. Because my first question was, why was an Irish priest in St. Augustine, Spanish St. Augustine? At that time, the British were suppressing the Catholic faith. So if you wanted to be a priest, you had to work through Spain to do it. So that's what happened. He came over and he lived there and did his mission. And when he passed away, he left his home to be used as an educational institution. And it was given to the Sisters of St. Joseph, who were French nuns. I believe there were 7 of them, who came here not speaking any English, not having any money, just sent here with the mission of teach the children of freed slaves. So the way that they funded their mission was by hand making lace and selling it. And if you go there, this is the room where they made the lace. And if you're standing this way looking at those chairs and you turn around, there's a large cabinet behind you with glass. And in that is some of the lace that they made. It's quite a story, very impressive. I actually went to the cemetery and visited their gravesites. Amazing women that they could do that. I can't even imagine. The Pina Peck House, the old Spanish Treasury building is located inside this house. It's one of the few houses that is completely furnished with period furniture, period clothing. The Dr. Peck came down here to provide care for people with tuberculosis. It was a big thing that if you lived up north and you had tuberculosis, they would send you south because the weather was so much better and more cohesive to healing. And it's really an extraordinary place to visit because of the old treasury room especially, and then the rest of the house is just so beautifully maintained. The Jimenez Fascio house. Louisa Fascio was an amazing woman. She, her family was in the Switzerland area, Switzerland, Florida. And during the, I believe it was the Second Seminole War maybe, they took refuge in Fernandina, and she met a soldier there and fell madly in love. They were so in love. And they were scheduled to get married, and he was killed. And so she never married. She moved down to St. Augustine and went to work for the people who had this boarding house. And she was so talented and so good at it and so intelligent and independent for a woman of that time that she eventually took control of the house and bought it and ran it as a boarding house all by herself. Amazing place, great place to visit. Again, go when the weather is cool, because it's warm inside that house. This was one of my personal favorites, and this is why I'm so glad I did this. I didn't tell you, this started as just a photography project. I did a large collection of 30-something very large black and white images, all framed identically, and I showed it throughout the region, and it was very well received. And I was talking at one particular place. I would always do a gallery talk, and I was talking in one particular place to a group of students, and I moved a girl to tears twice while talking about the Kingsley plantation and Anna in detail. And I thought at that point, yeah, because people have been telling me, you need to write these stories down, you need to. And I kept saying, yeah, sure. So at that point, when I moved this girl to tears twice, I'm like, yeah, I need to write this down. But this is why I'm so glad I did this. Preservation, restoration, that sort of thing is really important to me. And I think these places deserve to be preserved. Unfortunately, the Prince Murat house and the other houses that were in that collection of homes was owned by Kenneth Dow and then left to the Daytona Museum of Science and History. And those houses were, right after I published, they were all sold. And they were sold to a private developer. And now it is a boutique hotel. So I'm really glad that I got to see this house in the state that it was in. The Prince Murat house, Prince Murat was a nephew of Napoleon, and he was a European royalty, and he came to the U.S. after everybody went into exile. And he lived in this little, small, modest house, and what I loved about the writing desk was the idea of what kind of letters must he have been writing to his European relatives who were still, living in the lap of luxury. And he's in this tiny, tiny little house in St. Augustine. I really found it a very intriguing thought. And I'm sorry to say that, with all the history that goes with this house, because there's much more to it, and it's in the book, than just his stay there. And now it's like a boutique hotel. Not that there's anything wrong with it.
At least it saved the buildings rather than tearing them down.
I'm sorry?
I said at least it saved the buildings rather than
It
the
did save
development.
that building. Of the collection of homes that were there, and I believe there were 7, maybe 8 of them, one actually was torn down. Now, it was in bad shape, I will say that. It was the one that they said, you can't go in there, and I said, cool. I have no intention of, it was literally leaning to one side, and it's like, no, I'm not going in there. I'll shoot photos from the doorway. But this was the house that started it all, and this was the image that started everything. This reminded me, at my pawpaw's farm, off the kitchen, there was a small room like this, where all the dishes were lined up on the shelves, just open shelves, and the light falling in on the glass, and the ironing board, and it was just like, yeah, that's my childhood. One of the things that I learned here, and like I said, this was the first place I went, I walked around like, where is the grass? There's no grass here. Well, the reason there's no grass is because two things. Number one, fire. You don't want, and number two, you want to be able to see the snakes. I'd never thought about that, but I learned that. Then the other thing I want to share with you real quick, and then I promise I'll stop. Do you see this image? What do you see in the window?
Looks like the
Do
Eiffel
you
Tower.
see the Eiffel Tower? Oh, yeah, I didn't see it for the longest time either. But let me tell you the interesting thing about that. When I did the art collection, I've always been fascinated with France. As a small child, I was fascinated with France. So when I did the art collection, I thought, you know, we have a sister city in France. I'd love to show my work in France. So it just so happened that the woman who worked upstairs for me was someone that I knew who was associated with the Sister City organization and very big in the art community. So I invited her to come see one of the shows. And she comes and she looks at it and she says, hey, you know what we should do? I'm like, no, what? We should send this over to Nantes. We should send you over to Nantes and let you show your work there because they would love it. I'm like, what a great idea. So I go back to my office because I showed her my work on my lunch break. I go back to my office and I'm sitting at my desk and the phone rings and the girl who answers the phone. And then she buzzes me on the intercom and she's like, there's a woman on the phone for you. I can't understand anything she's saying. And I'm like, put her through. So hi, this is Mary Atwood, how can I help you? It is the head of the Sister Cities organization in Nantes calling me to personally invite me to bring my, so I look at this image and I think this was the very first day I ever worked on any of this project. The universe knew way before I did where this was going to take me. So that's basically my story, and I'm sticking to it. Last one I'm going to talk about, Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. I'm sure everyone here, because of the proximity, knows all about that. But it was definitely my personal favorite in many ways because of the story behind how everything there is exactly the way she left it. How many of you know why? When she passed away, she had it in her will for this structure to go to the University of Florida. It was to serve as a retreat for young writers. People studying creative writing at UF were going to come here and do their writing there. And her husband, Norton Baskin, knew what I know about college kids and what you know about college kids. So he hired a trucking company and he had everything packed up and taken to St. Augustine and put in storage, because that's where he lived. He lived in St. Augustine. So the house was used by University of Florida for a few years. I don't know how many, I've forgotten. And eventually it became a financial drain for them. And they said, okay, we need to give this to the state as a park. Well, when he heard about that, he's like, get the truck. And they loaded everything back up and he had it all brought back in and he personally oversaw having everything put back in its place. When you go there, her clothes are in the closet. Her embroidered napkins are on the tables. Her liquor is still in the cloak closet cabinet that she had built when she moved in. It is as if she has just walked out that back door and you just missed her. And that's the main reason I love it so much. And this image in particular, I really love because they told me, the binder person who went with me to photograph it, because at that time you weren't allowed to photograph it. I had to get special permission. And now you can. But he told me, he said, you know, she wrote her first novel from this bed while suffering from, what is it, malaria. She had gotten malaria a second time, and she wrote her first novel from that bed while suffering from malaria. Wow. It's like, that is amazing. So there you have it. Those are the ones that I talk about today. So if you'd like to get a copy of my book, I have some here. And also one other thing I'm going to mention, I have some prints with me as well, prints from the book. One other thing I want to mention to you, people have always asked me if I was going to write a second book. And I would say, yes, someday. I actually wrote a second book with a friend of mine who's an attorney. If you're at all interested in copyright law and how that affects you and your work, I highly recommend it. It's heavily illustrated, and we have taken legal language and brought it down to the artist level. So please look for it on Amazon. Even if you're not going to buy it, go look at it, because we're in pre-sales right now, and that counts. Every view it gets helps. So please go take a look at Very Artfully Explained. Now, does anyone have any questions? I'd love to answer questions. No? Yes?
I grew up in McClenny, right outside of Jacksonville, and I used to spend a lot of time at Glen St. Mary Nursery. British people owned it, and it's got some beautiful old buildings. You need to check it out one day.
Okay.
It's right off 10, I guess. And Glen St. Mary is just meander. It's like stepping back in time. You'd like it.
I would like it.
British, very
It's
British.
very much my kind of thing.
Was it all digital?
It was all digital, and I made all of the prints myself. As a matter of fact, I applied for a grant to purchase the printer that I used, and about the time that I finished it, that very expensive printer died a sad, sad death, and I wound up selling it for parts.
So when you walked around like that, you had to be mobile. What kind of camera did you? What kind of lens? Did you carry one
it
camera? Did you
depended.
carry a bunch of cameras, or?
I carry a bag that has a camera body in it, and the lens that I normally use is like an 20-something, 300.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah. But I also have an ultra wide, because some of these places are very, very small.
Yeah.
And so you need that ultra wide to, look, for instance, the Delia's house.
Right.
Tiny, tiny. I mean, it's 4 rooms, and those 4 rooms are maybe this big. Yeah. And you've got a big piano, so you want to get the whole piano. So yeah, you need that ultra wide. Yeah. It was fun though.
Yeah.
It was so much fun. I mean, it was a lot of work because, you know, like I said, you couldn't use any artificial light. So you had to figure out what time
So that's all?
of day,
Yeah,
what time of
very-
year,
yeah.
where's the sun gonna be, which way does the house face. I mean, it was a lot of really, it took me 3.5 years
Wow.
to do the whole project. Now, it included more than just the homes
Yeah.
here. I also had forts, I even photographed the Bulware Waterworks outside of
Oh, wow.
Gainesville. You had to get special permission for that too. I was looking for anything that was historic that, during that part of the process. And then when it became a book, I contacted one publisher, and they said, wow, this is great stuff, but it's not right for us, contact this publisher. I contacted the second publisher, and I'm like, yeah, I'm prepared, I'm gonna go through a whole bunch of rejections. And they said, this is wonderful, we would like you, it's not for us, but we would like you to contact this person. I contacted them. Now, at this point, I had maybe 5,000 words written, just a sample, and I had sent them the images. I contacted the third person, they said yes.
Whoa.
I was like, okay. And they said, well, we'd like to publish on this date, which was like 3 months later. And they said, we'd like 45,000 to 50,000 words. Can you do it? I'm like, I don't need to eat. I will have to still go to work because, you know, I've got to pay for the art habit. But yeah, I met their deadline and got it published. Now, we did have some back and forth. For instance, there's a home, the Chester Homestead up on, up at Okefenokee. Photographed that during the summer that Okefenokee was on fire. Oh my gosh. We were driving in, my husband, bless his heart, love this man. We're driving in and the land is smoldering. And like a week later, they wrapped the house in fireproof stuff. That's what kind of danger I was putting us in. And I'm like, I have to do it, I have to do it. So he drove me in, And I get inside, and there's a wood-burning stove. Now, Mrs. Chesser had a family of 7 to feed, and she lives in this swamp that is smoldering. And she's up at 6 o'clock in the morning chucking wood in this thing and making biscuits, and these people were brave and hardworking and so courageous. It was just, that's when it really hit me, the personal level of how brave these people were and the things they did. You know, we whine if the air conditioning goes out.
Well, I really appreciate the facet of using natural light. That's kind of, I've always taken pictures of natural light.
I love
It's
natural
all
light.
about the light, and it just,
Yeah.
you can't make it happen. You
Yeah.
can't turn
Yeah.
as they say, you know, a sow's ear into a silk purse. You just can't. If the light's there, you have to know, like you said, when it's gonna be there and where it comes from. And
Exactly.
The work is beautiful.
Thank you.
Beautiful, yeah.
Thank you.
And
Yeah,
the black
you know,
and
you have
white
that little
as well.
flash thing on the top of the camera. Who ever uses that? No.
Yeah, Mary, I'm glad your printer held out because your black and white are excellent.
That really added
We have
to
a
it as well.
consensus here.
I've been through several printers now, and I gotta say I'm real happy with the one I'm using now. Just like I go through different types of paper, and you know, I love that Red River Polar Metallic. Boy, that's some pretty stuff. Any other questions?
Where are you going from here?
Where? Back to the hotel? I just recently took 2 weeks off from my real world life and spent 2 weeks photographing in South Carolina. Photographing all sorts of places and different things, and really had a good time there. And I've just recently shown some of the photographs from that, and I think I might do a book about that. And I would also like to do a book about Paris. I've been to Paris 4 times now, and love it there. I would stay if they would let me, but I don't have the budget for it. You know, they do require you to have a budget I don't have, and because I've checked, yes, I would like to do a book about Paris, but you know, it's a tough competition on that one. So yeah, but the South Carolina thing is, yeah, I'm enchanted with that
You're
right now.
looking to do a book on South Carolina?
Yeah, I want to call it Low Country Lullaby, because all of the images have been digitally altered to give them like this misty, dream-like quality. Most of them are of old abandoned barns and things like that. I actually photographed one barn that was in use. I pulled up at this one intersection, and this guy was walking his dog, and I said, "Hey, is that your barn?" And he said, "Nope." And I said, "Do you know whose barn it is?" "It's my cousin's." I'm like, "Okay, is it okay if I You go ahead." That's actually the second time I got the "you go ahead." I went to photograph some trees in, I think it's called Lake Marion. They have the cypress trees growing up out of the water. I'd seen it on a satellite image, and I knew what I was going to have to get to go there. So I go to this parking lot where I know I'm going to have to, I've got my boots, you know. My husband insisted, get some snake boots. So I get my boots and put it on, and there's a park ranger over here, and I go over, because I don't want to get in trouble, you know. I risked that fire thing one time, we're not going to do anything too risky. So I go over to the park ranger and I say, "Hey, how you doing?" He's like, "I'm fine, ma'am, how are you?" And I said, "I'm good. I want to let you know I'm going to go off trail. I'm going to get to the lake, but I've got to go this way to get where I need to be." And he said, "Through the woods?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You go on." And I gotta say, it was quite a trek. I'm like carrying my camera, and I've got it slung sideways so I can kind of keep grip on it. And I'm like putting my hands on the downed tree and climbing over, and the muck is catching my boots, you know, because And I'm literally thinking, snakes, alligator, snakes, alligator. But I got out there and got a beautiful shot, beautiful shot. So happy with it. So yeah, that's the South Carolina thing has me right now. I don't know. Other than that, it's just kind of like whatever strikes my fancy. We ordered some food that came with dry ice, and I took the dry ice out and put it in the sink, and started doing like soap bubbles on it, and they would freeze and crystallize. And so I've created these images that look like they're from outer space. I just submitted one for a show yesterday, and I titled it "Light from Other Worlds." It's just, you know, it just depends on, like I said, I am the most schizophrenic artist in the world. It's just whatever strikes my fancy at the moment. I do some painting, I do some assemblage, sculpture, I do some writing, and, you know, whatever. Any other questions?
Why don't you tell them about how the South Carolina came about? You going up there being invited for 2 weeks?
There's a regional show called Art Fields, and Art Fields is a big show. It is, the grand prize in Art Fields is $25,000. And I've been accepted into Art Fields twice. I've been rejected twice too, because, you know, it happens. So I was up there and I was talking with some people there. I got to know some of the people who work with the Art Fields organization. And I was invited to go do an artist residency for 2 weeks and stay in Lake City, South Carolina, which doesn't really have a lake. I don't know why they call it that. They built a lake because they didn't have a lake. But yeah, it's kind of centrally located, so I was able to ramble all over the whole state and just had the time of my life. And 2 weeks alone, me and my camera. Everybody knows how great that is, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, nothing else to consider, but where am I taking my camera today? Now, I did go to some places that were way out, and I did tell the people that I knew there, you know, I'm going to where I won't have cell phone service. So if I don't come back by a certain hour, I want you to send the police to look for me. Because I mean, I was out there. I was in places where, you know, you didn't see anybody. But I photographed some really cool old bridges, like old stone bridges, and you went with me out to, we went back and did a coastal trip together, and you went with me out to Polly Island where I photographed a collapsed dock. It was just so cool. It's like, I don't know. Things like that. If the people in Lake City said, well, we can't wait to see what you do with our town, and I'm like, I'm photographing derelict barns. I really don't think that's quite the impression. It's not Chamber of Commerce stuff. Anything else? Yes?
Not a question as much as a thank you. As a native of Jacksonville and multiple generational, I want to point out 3, but over and over, your story really touched me.
Oh, thank
and
you.
I didn't break out in tears. Those who know me know I cried.
I didn't make you
It
cry.
was miraculous. 3 things. When the Breath of Life photo,
Yeah.
I was a Jacksonville Journal paper boy.
Oh, really?
And I
Nice.
remember folding the papers. It was on the front page of the Jacksonville Journal.
Yeah.
And of course, you had to fold all the papers and then throw them in the yard. And that whole time, as a 15-year-old boy, it's hitting me, 14-year-old boy, it's hitting me like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. The other one is the Sisters of St. Joseph and St. Augustine continue to exist. And they were the
Yes.
sisters
Yes.
at Bishop Kenny High School. So that was this amazing connection. And the last one that I'll say is after I graduated from college, my very first job was an OPS employee at Kingsley Plantation. At that time, it was part of the state of Florida.
Yes.
And opened the door for me to be a member of the Florida Park Service. So, those are just some examples of some, every photograph you showed and your commentary on it touched me in the heart. And I want to thank you for that. Your art worked here tonight.
Very true.
A couple more things.
Okay, so yeah, I will share with you a few of the prints. This is the print of the wedding dress, and I love that image. I just love that light from that window.
Absolutely.
So if you want to look at it, you're welcome to pass these around. This is the desk from the Prince Murat house with the quill. This was taken at the Major Webb House in Mandarin. I just really like again, the light from the window. It's perfect work for me. This is one of the women's bedrooms at the Jimenez Fascio house. This is the other picture that I used in the book about Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings. I love the lucky strikes. She was just such a character, wasn't she? And just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And so, you know, the things she did at that time that were unheard of, you know, she divorced that guy in New York and come off on her way. It's like, I'm gonna do what I wanna do. I mean, hey. Like, kind of like This was the other photo from the Carrie Clark house. Again, she was very religious and founder of the First Baptist Church. So I really like this table with the Bible open and the old-fashioned lamp. I don't know about you, but I remember this kind of a lamp from my childhood. I think everybody's grandmother had one, didn't they? I think it was like a prerequisite. You can't be a grandmother unless you have those lamps.
That's right.
Mhm.
With the little bulbs on it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is from the Chester Homestead. This is the one that my publisher said, no, it's not in Florida, so you can't include it. And I'm like, it's closer to my house, it's closer to Jacksonville than some of the others. No, it's not in Florida. And I'm like, well, you know, if they're gonna publish my book, I need to shut up. Do not argue with the publisher. So yeah, this is the wood burning stove that made me go, holy cow, my children would have been hungry. I promise you. It'd have been like, Mom, make some biscuits, and I'm like, it's hot.
I think I'd be cooking a lot.
This is the same image that you've already seen from Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings' bedroom. I'm gonna come back here because I feel like you guys are being left out. And then this is the one that started it all. I titled this one Comfort, because that's what it felt like to me the minute I saw it. And it was, it literally was. When I brought it up on the screen, looked at it and said,
And our club has gone there several times for field trips. Because it has so much to offer. Animals,
17
barns,
buildings.
and 17. And then one of our members is the guide, Susan Cashes. Sandra Cashes is the one that dresses up in the, she belongs to our organization.
Oh, cool. Have you been there when they're making cakes?
No, I haven't been
Yeah,
there,
come
but
this
I've
way.
seen those.
It's very cool. So those are just a few of the prints from the project. The art project, like I said, was 30-something prints, and it traveled for a good 3 years. And about halfway through that is when I had the experience with the young students standing in front of me just weeping. And it was hard to get that book written in that amount of time, but I gotta say it was the best thing that ever happened. It's just awesome.
What, Mary, let me ask you, why were they against you putting a tripod in there?
Good question, and I
Did you ever get an answer?
really don't know.
Holes in the floor?
Yeah, scratches on the floor. Punching.
Oh, hey, the tripod's got all rubber things on it.
But it also impedes other visitors. You know,
No,
so-
she had the whole, running the whole place, right, by yourself?
Only at one place.
Oh.
Only at the Delia's house. Everywhere else I went, I had a minder with me. I had someone with me to
Well, they
make
was
sure
protected.
that I wasn't
Protected,
doing
yeah.
anything, because most of these places, you know, didn't want you photographing at all. As a matter of fact, I can tell you one place that I wound up photographing turned me down for the art project. And then I called them back when I got my publisher. And I said, you know, I wanted to include you in the art project, but you weren't interested. But now I'm doing a book based on the art project, and they said, when would you like to come down?
And we just had that one,
Silly rules.
I won't say who they were. Yeah, I got a photograph.
yeah. No, we already had that, we passed it to you, yeah.
Yeah, there were a lot of rules and, you know.
Yeah, I know, I've always experienced that forever, but I always went to somebody above these people. And then they always got the permission, or I wouldn't show up. I mean, it's
Yeah.
as simple as that, you know,
Yeah.
it's as simple, permits for everything, tripod permits on federal property. Yeah. Yes.
I wasn't gonna argue with them,
No.
just like I wasn't gonna argue with the publisher.
Yeah, oh, yeah, well, okay, yeah,
Okay, fine, handheld it is.
yeah. No, they're good, they're really good, yeah, they're good. Yeah.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed the presentation. To learn more about the Branford Camera Club, please come to one of our meetings.